Hi, everyone. Welcome to the February 12th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, TimeformUS Analyst. I'll be joined in just a second by Craig Milkowski, the TimeformUS Chief Speed Figuremaker. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at the Sam F. Davis Stakes that was run last week at Tampa Bay Downs, as well as some other three-year-old performances from around the country, including a couple of impressive allowance winners, also Bellafina's win in the Las Virgenes Stakes out in California, and some turf stakes races that took place in Florida, as well as at Santa Anita this past weekend. Some interesting horses, some grade 2, grade 3 level types that were in action, and we'll take a look at all of those efforts by those runners. Without further ado, I'll welcome in my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Craig, how are you doing on this Tuesday afternoon?
I'm good. A little under the weather. Hopefully our listeners will put up with it here in freezing cold Oklahoma City, but otherwise the things are well.
Yeah, it's trying to decide whether it's snowing or raining here right now, so not looking too much better in Queens. But I'm happy that we're going to discuss some races taking place in warmer venues this weekend. We'll start with the Sam F. Davis Stakes because that was the big three-year-old prep from this past weekend. Most of the horses that were going to be in action moving forward to the Kentucky Derby were running at Tampa Bay Downs. And what did you think of this race overall? What did you make of the winner? We had a bit of an upset as the favorite Knicks Go was off the board. He went down to defeat and well-defined, got back on track and won this race.
He did. He put blinkers on and used it to full effect, opening up a clear lead. And he ran a nice TimeformUS speed figure, 114. He set a solid pace, 125 to the half mile. Nothing spectacular, but good. I'm curious to see how this one will do going forward. I'm never a huge fan of these kind of open clear leads and just win easily. That is usually when you are expected to run your best speed figures. And he is a 3-year-old, so not saying he can't improve, but I'm not going to go overly crazy on this one. And it'll be interesting to see who else comes in for the Tampa Bay Derby.
Yeah, I thought this race was notable more for just the general disappointments by some other runners rather than the winner, who, to give him all the credit he deserves. He ran a nice race. A 114 TimeformUS speed figure is certainly respectable for this time of year. And he's a horse who had shown some potential as a 2-year-old. He won that 2-turn race at Gulfstream restricted to Florida breds last year. I think that was his best performance to date after he didn't show up in the Breeders' Cup and he didn't run well in the Mucho Macho Man. But like you were saying, the blinkers obviously made a big difference. I think what really gave him a strength in this race, well-defined, is that he was able to outrun the other speeds and take a horse like Knicks Go out of his best game, because he's a horse that really wants to be forwardly placed, in the clear chasing, if not outright on the lead. And Knicks Go was not able to do that. I think it really affected his performance. And well-defined, he wasn't setting a super fast pace, but he just kind of ran them all off their feet. And the only horse that could really close into that pace was Kentucky Wildcat. Unfortunately, he comes out of the race injured.
Yeah, that's what I heard. He won't be going on the trail. And I was a little shaky on him as it was. He was a rare horse that his speed figures for me, even though they look nice, they were kind of questionable because and Naira usually is one of the better circuits for timing races, but he had the rare distinction of coming out of 2 in a row that had issues. So it's kind of wishy-washy on him, especially at the short price. He certainly ran okay. I mean, he was 8 lengths clear of the third place horse, I believe. Now, maybe hold on. I have our chart setting.
Yeah,
on
that's
the wrong
right.
Race.
But
he was. Yeah, he was 8 lengths clear of So Alive. And to be honest, wow, what was that? How was that one 3-1? That was one I couldn't figure out. And unfortunately, you can't always take advantage of underlays. But I thought that horse was a massive underlay, and he just looked to be struggling through the race. And I was pretty shocked to see he got third. But I think that was just basically a battle of attrition.
When you have a younger sibling and that younger sibling has to do everything bigger and better than you did, I feel like that's what So Alive is to his half sibling Vino Rosso, because he is just the maxed out version of Vino Rosso. I mean, he's more sluggish, more ornery. He doesn't want to do what the jockey tells him to do. It seems like he gets bet for no reason, even more so than Vino Rosso did. I didn't get why he was taking so much money. It seemed like he just didn't want to do it for the first half of the race, and then he made a belated run to get third, but he never really impacted the race. I mean, he got a 97 TimeformUS speed figure, I believe, which just is not going to be competitive in these races moving forward. I didn't get his appeal going in. I don't get his appeal moving out of the race. Knicks Go, he was pretty disappointing. I think you were really looking for Nick Sko to rebound from that poor performance at Churchill Downs in the slop in the Kentucky Jockey Club. And it's just starting to make me wonder, was he ever really that good, or has he just gone wrong, or were the trips not working out for him in these last two races? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned last week your reservations about the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and I think that just starts to add to it. I was willing to put a line through his race in Kentucky. I think he had a wide trip that day. He was drawn way outside and just didn't show up at all. He ran a little better this time, but certainly nothing like his Breeders' Cup performance, and just not a whole lot of upside that I can see from here unless he can get a clear lead, which generally doesn't happen if you stay on the Kentucky Derby trail. Things only get tougher from here.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm just knocking Game Winner because, Game Winner's probably going to come back and win both of his prep races pretty easily, given where they're going to run him. That's just the reality of it. But, I think you do have to question a little bit the competition that he was facing last year, just given the way that Nick Sko has come back, given the way that Gunmetal Gray has come back and not really moved forward and perhaps taken a step backwards. Well-Defined did come out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile as well and win this race. But, I don't want to put too much stock in a horse that was a non-factor in a race like the Breeders' Cup and elevate the race because of that. So we'll see. I'm not really sure where these horses stand moving forward because the performances have kind of been all over the place. I think there will be some other horses coming to the Tampa Bay Derby, some allowance horses that we'll discuss in a little bit that'll make that, that race a little more interesting than this Sam F. Davis was. But, we'll see if these horses are factors moving forward. The other race that I think we have to discuss just in terms of graded stakes events for 3-year-olds from the past weekend was the San Vicente out in California, where Coliseum, I think it's safe to say at this point, he's been exposed.
Yeah, he was another one, almost like So Alive. I have no idea how you can make this horse 3 to 5. It just has to be on Bob Baffert.
He was 22 to 1 in the Derby Future Wager at the close of betting. It just boggles the mind.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd want him at 220 to 1. There's just nothing to see here. I guess it's just the Smith Baffert thing, and it's hard to fault people. They basically win everything out there, but this horse just goofed off last time out. He just didn't look competitive at all, and I didn't see much of the same. I saw much of the same this time. There's no figures in our charts yet, but my assistant does Southern California. He did let me know the winner Sparkyville is going to it'll be around the 109, which is solid, but I don't know that any of these are really Derby horses. He looks like a sprinter. Good effort by him. He did get a little bit nice setup. The pace was pretty quick. I imagine at least one of the fractions will be coded in red when the figures make it to the charts. But other than that, just not a whole lot to talk about here. I think we're looking more at sprinters than anything else.
Yeah, the one horse that I do want to follow a little bit moving forward is actually Bob Baffert's other horse, Desmond, because within the context of the race, I'm not, like you're saying, I'm not sure how strong this race really is, but within the context of the race, I think he did run the best because he actually broke a little bit slower than Coliseum out of the gate and had to rush up to contest that pace that was definitely at least honest, maybe fast. And I thought he battled back really gamely when Sparkyville came to him in the stretch. If you watch the horses crossing the wire, Sparkyville actually was lucky to just get his head in front right at the finish, because as soon as they gallop out, Desmond runs right ahead of that horse and gallops out ahead of him. He's got some pedigree to stretch out. He's by Union Rags. He's out of a dam that's a half to Smoke and Frolic, who won a bunch of route races on the dirt. So maybe he does better moving forward. Maybe he just liked the wet track as a son of Union Rags too. They seem to like sloppy tracks. I'm not really sure if he's that good just based on what he was facing in this race, but he's the one horse that I would be a little bit interested in moving forward.
Yeah, and for those not familiar with our speed figures, we actually, it's not just final time. We look at the pace as well. And just looking at the worksheet I sent to my assistant there, I'm pretty sure he's going to get a higher speed figure than Sparkyville by a point or two, just because of being, a little bit closer to the pace, battling up front a little bit more. So, a point or two, not a huge deal, but he would be the one to look at going forward out of here.
All right. Well, those were the two graded stakes that were run for 3-year-olds last weekend. But one of the most talked about races was actually an allowance race that took place at Gulfstream Park. We just mentioned how Coliseum went off at 22 to 1 in the Derby Future Wager. Actually, another horse who wasn't participating in graded stakes also went off at that price when they closed wagering for this round of the Future Wagering. And that was Global Campaign, who won his second start in, I believe, the 10th race at Gulfstream on Saturday, going a mile on the 16th. What were your impressions of this performance? Because I've got some feelings about this horse.
I mean, it looked good visually, but, when I sat down to make the figures, and for the record, I gave him a higher figure than Beyer when you kind of look at the two scales we use by a good 10 points, but it's still not that great. And, I get a lot of the people saying, well, he was eased up late. And while it's true, maybe he could have run faster. He probably could have. It doesn't necessarily translate to meaning he could run faster with a tougher trip, which he's almost sure to have next time he comes. I mean, it doesn't get a whole lot easier than this. He was 3 to 5. Standard deviation looked to be his only real competition, and I wasn't overly impressed with that one coming in. He ran just okay. Not a horse I'd want going forward. Being a Chad Brown, he's probably always going to take money. So that just definitely not blown away by this race. I'll be looking to bet against him wherever he shows up next. Yeah,
I mean, I guess you're not going to get some of the hate mail that the Beyer people will get from that speed figure, because it seems like people really love this horse. I think the 107 speed figure, it makes enough sense. I don't see how you could go any higher than that, as you were saying, just based on the fact that standard deviation was second. I mean, while he did earn that grade 1 placing as a 2-year-old, he just never ran a really fast race. Maybe these horses are improving at this time of year, but you look at the 3rd place finisher too. Actually, another son of Curlin. It's funny, if you look at the top 3 finishers in this race, they're all by Curlin out of AMP Indy Line Dams. So I guess they're all bred to run all day. And that's one of the reasons that people are so excited about Global Campaign, because he's got this pedigree, the half to Bolt Doro. He's just bred to get the classic distances. But, it's hard to justify, based on the time, this speed figure being, anywhere close to exceptional. I mean, he's going to have to run a lot faster to be competitive in the graded stakes races that are going to be run, or he's going to have to earn his points to get into races like the Kentucky Derby. And, I've seen some people talking about, a comparison to the slower allowance race that Always Dreaming ran before he won the Florida Derby. But I think there are some major distinctions to make before you, condone a comparison like that, because Always Dreaming ran a slow speed figure because he set a ridiculously slow pace, something you can't do on dirt, and earn a fast speed figure. They went the half in 51 and the 3/4 in 1:16 when he won that allowance race, which is just ludicrous. If you're trying to, run a fast final time, it's impossible. Global Campaign set an honest pace. He was sort of geared down at the end, but like you were saying, I don't think he could have run that much faster. I didn't like that standard deviation, who had been in a drive for about 3/8 of a mile, was getting to him at the end of that race, even though he was, the winner was being eased up under the wire. I don't really buy into the fact that he's can run a lot faster. And to me, this horse still has a lot to prove. And if he's going to get bet, the way he was in this future wager moving forward, I've got to be against him in the future.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And especially when I look at a horse who I think we're going to talk about next, Dreammaker, who won an allowance race at the fairgrounds, which I personally thought was way more impressive than Global Campaigns. And I haven't heard a whole lot about this horse. He got a 113 from me, his first race since back in October, but he just looked really good doing it. He was wide throughout the race, especially on the first turn, which is usually a tough trip to overcome. He showed he's able to rate. And if you just gave me these two horses and said you had to pick one next, I would take Dreammaker every time.
I am totally on the same page as you. I had not even really been aware that this horse was returning. I didn't notice this race ahead of time. I was just kind of combing through some of the charts to find things to talk about for the podcast, and I noticed this race. And I remember this horse from last year at Saratoga. I think he ran in the Hopeful, and there was a lot of hype around him. I think he was originally going to run in the Saratoga Special before they changed course. Maybe there was a setback or something. But I remember Mark Casse had really liked this horse. There was a lot of hype around him. The Hopeful didn't play out of his running style because it was just dominated on the front end. And if you watch his Beatrice Futurity from last year, his final start as a 2-year-old, I mean, he just got completely eliminated at the start. He was slammed between horses, had to steady really badly. And just in that 13-horse field or whatever it was, he had no chance after that. So his 2-year-old campaign was just kind of a bust. But they had really liked this horse. And I thought the same thing you did. I loved the way he was powering through the stretch at the fairgrounds in this race. He was up stalking a pace that it wasn't slow, but it was honest enough. And I think it's worth noting that the horses that finished second and third, they came from last and second to last. I mean, it was a pace that pretty much fell apart behind this horse. And I mean, he finished up really strongly over a track that seemed pretty dead at the fairgrounds. That 113 Timeformers speed figure, it stacks up very well against some of these graded stakes horses at this time of year. And he's got an awesome pedigree. That second dam, Beautiful Pleasure, she was a champion back in the late 90s. I think this one's got some real potential. I'm excited to see where he goes from here. These horses, actually, Global Campaign and Dreammaker, they might meet up next in the Tampa Bay Derby because given the way the timing works, I think Mark Cass even mentioned that race as a potential target. So it'll be interesting to see if we get to compare these horses in the future.
Yeah, well, I think the Risen Stars, obviously, too soon. That's next week. So, yeah, hopefully that would be. I'd like that as a bettor. You always want to see if you can validate your opinion at the window.
Yeah. Well, that was the 3-year-old colt action, but there was a pretty exciting 3-year-old filly in action at Santa Anita on Saturday, and that was Bellafina. And she was super impressive in her return, going 7 furlongs at Santa Anita last month. I was really impressed by that race, and I believe she got a pretty high speed figure for that performance. She came back and stretched out to a mile in the Las Virgenes, and she wasn't quite as visually impressive. The speed figure dropped off a little bit. What were your impressions of the race? Because I know some people came away a little disappointed.
I thought it was just what she needed, to be honest. I wasn't blown away, but I didn't have a problem with the race. I mean, she won pretty easy. I was pretty impressed with the runner-up. I think she's a horse. I'm going to guess at how you pronounce it, Anaya El Rab. I don't know if that's right or not. I should have watched a replay and seen what Frank said. But, yeah, she's an improving horse. So either one of those two going forward, I like. Maybe at the longer distance next time, if they meet up, I might go the other way just based on price. But I think it's two promising fillies right there. To both trained by sharp guys. So I wouldn't be surprised to see both of those two in the starting gate for the Oaks.
Yeah, I was probably a little bit too hard on this horse when I first watched the race because initially, I mean, she was what? I think she was 1-9.
Yes.
It just seems a little disappointing that she had to really gut out the victory, win by, a little bit less than a length. In retrospect, she did duel with Mother on the far turn. I doubt the pace was color coded red, but they were going.
It's not.
Yeah, they were going an honest clip. It's not like they were walking on the front end. And she did put Mother away. And like you said, the runner-up is a horse that could be improving. Seems like a horse that's going to get better with distance, and that might be what's happening. My thing with Bellafina is she's obviously very talented. I just get the sense that she's really just a naturally fast horse. She's a horse that in the future is probably going to be best going like a 7 furlongs, maybe like a 1-turn mile in the Acorn. I'm not yet convinced that she's really a Kentucky Oaks kind of horse. I don't know if she's going to want the 2-turn mile and an eighth. I know she's like this bigger, impressive filly, and people just generally think horses like that will get more distance. And she's bred to do it, I suppose. But just given what I've seen out of her, I've seen so much brilliance in her sprint races and just not quite the same level of excitement in some of her route races.
Yeah, and the other reservation I have about her is we have the track coded in bright red that day. The track was listed good, and I looked through all the races to see why. That's what I like to do, because that just tells me a whole bunch of front runners won. And we do take things like the odds into consideration. We're not going to give a whole lot of credit to a 1-9 going wire to wire as calling something speed favoring. But other than the opening race of the day, which was at 5.5 furlongs, I think virtually every other dirt race was won wire to wire, including a few of them by some big price horses. So there is a possibility she was helped by the track on this day as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because when you're analyzing favorites like this, you don't want to be looking for reasons to support them in the future. You want to be looking for reasons that they might be vulnerable because they're going to be short prices moving forward. The other 3-year-old race from the past weekend was not quite at the level as the Las Virgenes. I think it's an ungraded stakes, but it was also around Tampa Bay Downs on the same day as the Sam F. Davis, and that was the Suncoast, which was won by second-time starter Point of Honor, who had won a maiden race at Gulfstream for George Weaver in her debut. It wasn't a strong field overall. There were a lot of horses coming into the race with a lot to prove still, but I liked what I saw from this filly. She really did it the right way, and you don't often see horses breaking slowly and just making sustained runs for the entire race, which is what she did. The time didn't come back that fast, but just from a visual standpoint, it was okay.
Yeah, and this was one she came out of a race. She broke her maiden around 2 turns at Gulfstream, and she kind of overcame a slow pace that day. And, so her speed figure was a little lacking, as you mentioned before. It's tough to run a good speed figure when you get a slow pace. So I was kind of looking forward to betting on this horse, but it turned out the public wasn't fooled with her. They jumped on her, made her better down the 5-2. And kind of the same thing. She didn't get a great speed figure here. She got a 98, so she did improve off the first one out as to be expected. But the pace was moderate at best, and she was actually last early on. And like you said, made a nice sustained run. So this is the kind of horse I don't write off just because of a speed figure that might not look as great as you'd think, just due to the setup of the race and the run that she put in. To come from last against that pace means, she was going quite a bit faster than the ones in front of her through the lane. So she's one I would be willing to take a shot with her going forward. I think she's got room to improve.
Yeah, and speaking of stretching out in distance, she should have no problem with it because I believe she's a daughter of Curlin. And just given the way she finished this race, it just seems like she might be a slower horse in general, but she's going to run all day. So I'm not going to be concerned about her stretching out to the 1.125, whereas Bellafina still has to answer that question. We'll see what they do moving forward. I'm not sure where these 3-year-old fillies really stand right now. We've yet to see the champion Jaywalk come back. I'm looking forward to her return. But I think there's still a lot of sorting out to do in that division. In terms of other major stakes races that took place in the past weekend, a lot of turf action, both with the males and the females, a little bit Gulfstream and some out in California. Let's start out with the California stakes races. And the San Marcos was the biggest race run out there. It was a grade 2 at 1.25 miles. And it was a big field, competitive field. And Platinum Warrior with the mild upset, or actually probably a significant upset. I think he was 16-1 in that race, with Shane Foley riding in from Ireland.
Yeah, this one was a bit surprising. I was really surprised this horse went off 16-1. On our speed figures, he had run the same speed figure as Chicago Style, who I think was a 3-1 favorite. They finished just apart. One was Chicago Style was 4th. Platinum Warrior was 5th. So particularly on turf, there are times you can find some value on these turf races. A big overlay here, in my opinion, and he was just one that probably shouldn't have went off those odds. Sometimes it's easy to say after the race, but I thought that going forward, I kept looking at the past performances, trying to figure out the discrepancy, and especially seeing, he's a 4-year-old who, he had just run that lifetime best last time out, so certainly didn't have any reason to think he couldn't match it on Saturday.
Yeah, watching this race, I do want to give a lot of credit to his rider, Shane Foley, who I think was only riding like his second race in the United States. He rides in Ireland, I think, mostly, and a little bit in Dubai. This was a race over a good turf course. It wasn't the typical firm turf course that we see out in California. And I think especially at Santa Anita, with that really short stretch, when riders come in here from Europe and they encounter a track like Santa Anita, they're often not afraid to make that early move to the lead because a lot of the horses they're riding do have more stamina than the U.S. horses. And this horse, Platinum Warrior, I believe he is an Irish bred, son of, I think, Galileo. So he's bred to run all day. And Shane Foley was saying after the race, he wasn't afraid to make an early move on this horse because he knew that he could stay the distance and keep on running. I think of a performance like High Chaparral in the Breeders' Cup, not High Chaparral, that other Aidan O'Brien horse that won the Breeders' Cup Turf most recently, whose name is escaping me now, I'm forgetting.
I will come back to it.
Yeah, what when Found was second in that race, or Flintshire. I'm forgetting the horse's name. But his rider that day wasn't afraid to make that early move on the backstretch and kind of open the race up. And sometimes you have to do that in these large fields because at Santa Anita, there's only so much ground you can make up in the stretch when they're going, only about 3/16 of a mile. So this horse, he ran well this day. I'm not sure if he's going to be a player in this division moving forward because this was not really the cream of the crop. But he took advantage of circumstances.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't want to get too carried away on this race because just to be honest, a grade 2 on the turf in California is not a grade 2 at Gulfstream or at Keeneland or when they actually make it to New York. It's just a level below out there. They're decent horses, but until things change, they're just not at the same level as the horses back east.
Yeah, and the other race that was run at Santa Anita on the turf on Saturday was the Thunder Road, which you actually give a higher speed figure to as True Valor, another Irish-bred horse ridden by a foreign jockey. This one trained by Simon Callahan. He stepped up with a pretty nice performance, although he might have taken advantage of a poor trip by his main rival.
He did. I did actually want to talk about that one just a little bit. First, we should brag just a little bit. He was a top power pick in our Timeform US PPs. I think he was 11-1.
Yeah, I saw that a little bit too late. He was also, up close in the pace projector in a situation favoring the leader. So the Timeform US PPs really singled him out as a horse to take a look at a price.
But yeah, I did want to mention, you mentioned River Boyne. I think he did get a bit unlucky, but I do think it's a little bit overblown because sure, he had traffic and he may very well have won the race. But had he gotten through, we would all said, yeah, he won, but he had a perfect trip where he saved ground the whole time. So I'm a little leery of these trips. I'm not sure if he was truly 3-5. I'm not sure why he let himself get pinned in there. I think the rider on the 2, I don't remember who it was at the time, Ohio, kind of played games. He left the rail open, and the rider, I think it was Flavian Pratt on River Boyne, took the bait and kind of got pinned in. And it almost looked like the rider on Ohio was riding the favorite almost as much as his horse and trapped him in. So yeah, maybe he did re-rally a little bit when he got clear, but those are the kind of trips everybody sees them. So I don't get overly excited about them.
Yeah, River Boyne obviously was unlucky, but, like you were saying, he shouldn't have been in that spot, really. When you're riding a favorite like that, you don't have to get too clever. You just have to get him into the clear, and that never really happened for him. River Boyne's a nice horse. I don't want to knock him. I mean, he deserved to be odds on in that race. I think he was going for his 7th win and 7 starts at Santa Anita, so he obviously runs well, and the mile is his best distance. He just didn't get the right trip that day. This horse, True Valor, he's another horse that's actually bred in Ireland, that's come over to this country. He seems like he's okay. The speed figure is respectable, but, again, I'm not sure that these horses are really, at, the top of this division or anywhere close to it.
No, not at all. And let's go back to Tampa and talk a little bit about Inspector Lindley, who was winning the Tampa Bay Stakes for the 2nd year in a row. And I just thought it was a really nice performance by him. I expected a little bit more out of Heart to Heart, especially when he got a clear lead. I actually picked him on out of the gate. So I'm starting to have my doubts that maybe he's hit the wall at the age of 8 and nothing wrong with that. I mean, he's had a heck of a career. But when you get that kind of trip and he's always done well with it, that's a horse where you maybe say, well, he's time. And I think I'm going to break up with him from now on going forward.
Yeah. By the way, that horse that I couldn't remember the name of is Highland Reel, the Breeders' Cup winner. Mental block. It feels like it might be the end of the line for Heart to Heart, unfortunately, because these are the kinds of races that Heart to Heart is supposed to win. He got that clear lead. He just never seemed comfortable. Julian Leproux did everything right with him, got him to the front, tried to get him to relax after, a pretty quick first quarter mile. And, he just never settled. Even though he was on the lead and it was the position where he likes to be in, he just had his head carried much higher than usual. He just didn't seem to really have his mind in the game at any point. He let horses come to him at the top of the stretch and just seemed kind of reluctant to really battle on. If Heart to Heart can't win a race like that, I think he might be in trouble moving forward. And he is getting up there in age, and he's had a nice career, so maybe that's the end of the line for him. We'll see. But Inspector Lindley, he got a great ride from, I believe, Jose Ortiz. And he's just a horse that seems to always be right there in these races. And, he deserved to get a win. The big takeaway for me from this race is, boy, doesn't this flatter Glorious Empire? Because I think the top 3 finishes in this race all finished behind Glorious Empire, well behind him in the Fort Lauderdale back in December. And I think that really solidifies the form of that race because it seemed like Glorious Empire had taken this big step forward that day. And the fact that all these horses, him, including Curbon and Desidero, all came back to run so well in this Tampa Bay Stakes, it really flatters that horse.
Yeah, no doubt. It's definitely looks like a strong race. And we talked about it last week. That's one of the ways I handicap. I look at the charts. And so I know when I look back at this race, not this race, but some of the previous one, won by Glorious Empire, I'll know right away, hey, this was a strong race and you want to watch these horses going forward. Yeah. What did you think about the Endeavor Stakes with Hawksmoor?
It's funny. she was projected to be on the lead, I think, even by the pace projector. She just seemed like faster than these horses, but for whatever reason, she didn't break that well. And Javier Castellano seemed like he would have been interested in going forward, but the horse just seemed, did not have her usual speed out of the gate. But I thought from that point on, Javier Castellano did everything right with this horse. He just sat as quietly as possible, just kind of tried to get her to settle on the rail in behind horses, saved all the ground with her, moved up when there was an opportunity to do so, got her out at the top of the stretch, never, moving off the rail until they got into the straightaway. And it all worked out for her. I wasn't super impressed by the fact that she only beat the second place finisher, who was just okay by 3/4 of a length, given that Hawksmoor has that graded stakes form, that grade 1 form. But, given the fact that she had to come from off the pace, I thought it was a decent effort.
Yeah, that's why I asked you. I was curious if you thought maybe it was an intentional change of running style, or, she's just getting a little older. Man, she's a 6-year-old mare now, so maybe she has lost a step. And if so, that's probably the way for her to go, to, change that style up a little bit. And she didn't blow anything away with the speed figure scale with a 119, which it's solid for grade 3 fillies and mares. But yeah, the thing I found interesting was the complete change in running style for her. I mean, she's never won a race running anything like that way before. So it definitely surprised me when I saw the race early. I was like, wow, she's 6-5. She's in big trouble. And she was able to still get the win.
Yeah, she proved that she's not a horse like Heart to Heart, who seems to need everything his own way up front. And it's good to have that versatility moving forward, because Hawksmoor, while she has been successful on the front end, she is a horse that has shown the ability, even when she leads races, to really sprint for home and kind of close on her own fractions, in a pretty impressive way. And the fact that she can do that even rating behind horses, that's going to be good for her moving forward. We'll see where she really fits into this division. I'm not sure about the class of this race, as you were alluding to, but it's always nice to see horses show a bit more versatility. Another race in this division was run at Gulfstream, the Sewanee River, and Rimska, I believe, was cross-entered in the Endeavor and chose to run as the heavy favorite in the Sewanee River. I know Rimska's a horse that people have been very high on, including her own connections. She's a horse that there's been some hype around. She's had some visually impressive wins back in the past, especially during her 3-year-old season. But the circumstances in the Sewanee River just were totally against her.
Yeah, this is one when you pull up the chart in TimeformUS, you're going to see just all the fractions are coded in blue, even through the mile. Valedictorian set the pace, which was pretty obvious looking at our pace projector and just looking at the PPs that she would get the lead. But to get it in these fractions was pretty surprising. I mean, she only got a 90 pace figure for the opening quarter and half mile, final time in 1:15. And when you do that, I mean, horses, if you give a quality horse that kind of lead, she was clear, she was going slow, they're almost impossible to catch. And she actually, it's a kind of amazing. Rimska actually made up a little bit of ground on her through the stretch. She did happen to gain a length, but she was never going to catch her once. So once I saw that 1:16, I mean, it was slow throughout, but when you get the 1:16 at 3/4, the race was virtually over.
Yeah, and Irad Ortiz was put into a difficult position on the backstretch because I believe John Velasquez on Special Point, I believe her name is, moved up inside of that horse. And Rimska was kind of just put in this precarious position between horses, which is not where you want to be when you're trying to make a run with a closer, because you've got to really wait for something to open up, and he had to wait a little bit too long. And by the time he got out, at around the quarter pole, there was just no chance to make up the ground on Valedictorian, who was just sprinting home. And a lot of people think about TimeformUS speed figures and think about us just rewarding horses for setting fast paces or being involved in fast paces, but we also reward horses for closing into very slow paces. And I think Rimska is kind of the quintessential example of that, because her raw speed figure for this race was a 1:12, but her TimeformUS speed figure in the end, once paces factored in, was a 1:22, which is a 10-point bump. We're trying to give credit for a horse that could not have run better given the circumstances.
No, I think most people realize that. Of course, individual races vary, but for the most part, late speed is the most important thing on turf, and that's why we give credit that way. And 10 points is about as big as you're going to get in a turf route, 10-point bump off the final time figure. But she did check in 2 points higher than valedictorian with that 122. And, this is exactly what we're trying to capture with our speed figures. We're saying, hey, valedictorian won the race, but Rimska probably was the better horse this day. And, we like to show it numerically.
Yeah, and as a handicapper, you can get a little too focused on results sometimes, and people will see moving forward that Rimska lost this race as the odds-on favorite, and maybe she'll be a higher price next time in a tougher spot. And I think she's a horse that you want to really give a pass for in this race, because if you liked her beforehand, I wouldn't hold this race against her. That was the major graded stakes action from the past weekend, but we did see a really talented horse in action at Santa Anita on Friday in Axeman, who was able to rebound from a pretty disappointing effort in the Malibu at the end of December. He came back and beat, I believe, Allowance Optional Claiming Company, and he did it the right way. I mean, he was visually impressive.
He was, he beat a decent group. I think Edwards Going Left was in there. That Timbers horse whose name's escaping me right now, Shiver Me Timbers or something like that. Beat him. So solid group. He ran a 118 TimeformUS speed figure. So I would say solid. He's definitely, if he's going to move back in the stakes company, that's not going to get it done. It's probably one I'd be looking to go against if he takes money, which he invariably will, probably being by trained by Baffert and depending who he rides. But I mean, I'm not going to knock the effort. He did what he had to do. He looked good visually. Just numerically, I wasn't blown away.
Yeah, he's a funny horse. It seems like he runs these monstrous speed figures when he has everything go right for him. But when there's like a straw in his path, like he didn't make the lead in the Malibu, he had a horse dueling with him in that race at Churchill where he didn't run well last year. It just seems like he's not really able to overcome adversity. And I'm always wary of horses like that when they move back up in class, off impressive wins like this, because sometimes they're not able to translate that form. And we'll see if Axeman can turn that around. But up until now, I'm just a little bit skeptical of him as a top horse.
Same here. One horse I did want to talk about, just because I was such a fan of Winter Memories, is Winter Sunset. Won an allowance race. She's a 3-year-old filly, won a turf allowance at the fairgrounds. She's out of Tappet. And like a lot of Tappet, she was kind of goofy during the race, didn't want to run straight. I think there was even an inquiry into the stretch run, but there wasn't a change made. But I really think this is one to look at going forward. She looks like she has a whole bunch of talent. She's won both her starts. She got 100 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort, and I'm curious to see where this one will show up next.
Yeah, it was kind of a bizarre race to watch because it was only a 5-horse field, I believe, but you had 5 horses stacked across the track coming to the quarter pole. It was kind of a weird ride on the runner-up Elsa, who, for whatever reason, I think Corey Lannery was on her, left just this huge gap between him and the horse on the lead down on the rail. I mean, there was enough room for 3 horses to come through that hole between them. Coming to the quarter pole, and Winter Sunset was one of those horses kind of squeezing up in there. And, she did drift out a little bit. I don't know I don't think it really affected the result because she, Elsa had every chance to get back on terms with her, and Winter Sunset just pulled away late. I agree. I was a huge fan of Winter Memories. I remember seeing, I was at Saratoga when she won her Lake George. That was like her breakout race, and she was just so impressive that day. I mean, just, she had trouble at the quarter pole and just rocketed past the entire field. I think she's only had one other full up until this point, and he's like I think a grade 1 winner in Kazakhstan or something like that. So we're not going to see him. But Winter Sunset, I think, is the first one to run in the U.S., and she seems like she's got some talent. I'll see where she goes from here, but she's done everything right up until this point. Speaking of other 3-year-old horses that have been running on the turf recently, I just want to give a quick mention to just the incredible dominance by Chad Brown in these maiden races from the past weekend. I think there were 3 maiden races between Saturday and Sunday for 3-year-olds, colts, and fillies, and he won all of them with first-time starters. The one I think that really stood out to people was Claus, who won, I believe, the 9th race on Saturday and earned a pretty respectable speed figure. She got a trip and some pace in front of her, but I think she's a daughter of Speightstown, a homebred for Juddmonte, who was visually impressive, I thought, in her victory.
Yeah, she did. She got a 97 speed figure, which is definitely, like you said, good. I do want to caution people with these Gulfstream Park turf speed figures, particularly for maidens, in that they're very difficult to make with the vast array of course setups that Gulfstream Park uses. I'd like to think that I go as far as anyone does trying to decipher these races. But, when you're just constantly changing run-ups throughout the day, you use 2 and sometimes 3 different rail settings. They can be a nightmare. So my only point on that is just don't be too over-reliant on speed figures coming out of these Gulfstream Park turf races. Trust your eyes in a lot of cases. And this horse looked really good. I do try to validate the numbers as the horses run back, and I will go back and change them if I have to. I try not to do that very often, but the Gulfstream turf races are one place where it definitely is good to track.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up because, I was kind of doing a double take when I looked at this race in comparison to the 12th race on the same card, which I think was just another division of the same race, which Sherrod Brown, of course, also won with a filly named Cafe Americano. And I thought she was, just as visually impressive. But you look at the time, and they ran, I think, a second and 2/5 slower. So obviously, I think it got a speed figure that was just barely above 80. I will say, if you look through the fields, there's no doubt that the quality between the two divisions was in Claus's race. There were some horses with proven form who had run some fast speed figures in their prior starts. So it makes a lot of sense that Claus would run a high speed figure. And we don't know if Cafe Americano was facing the same caliber of horse because I believe the runner-up had run much slower in her prior starts. So while they both were visually impressive, one of them might have been facing a much weaker field, and I think you do have to be aware of that. But like you were saying, these races are hard to compare, even though they run on the same turf courses. I do want to give one shameless plug. There was a race on Sunday that was between Valid Point and Bar Harbor, who are both first-time starters, one for Chad Brown, one for Shook McGahee. I'm going to be kicking off a new video series, I think tomorrow, where I look at some trips and discuss horses to watch out of these races. And I do want to look at this race from Gulfstream because they are both first-time starters, and I think they both had interesting trips to discuss. So more on that tomorrow. But Bar Harbor, who was a first-time starter for Shook McGahee in that race and finished second, I was very impressed by that horse, and I kind of want to discuss his trip a little more in depth when I get the opportunity.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing that. I think that's about all I have for this week, Dave. So I'll let you send us out of here.
Yeah, next week we'll take a look at the Risen Star from Fairgrounds and the Southwest, which I think is going to be run on Monday from Oaklawn Park. The Fairgrounds race is already drawn, but I haven't really taken a look at it yet. It's a large field. So we'll recap those races on Tuesday's show next week. Thanks for listening this week, everybody. You can obviously listen on DRF.com. Also check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or SoundCloud. You can find the TimeformUS Pacecast and other TimeformUS or other DRF podcasts at those locations. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.